In the harsh world of Viking clans, where blood oaths and arranged marriages determine one's fate, Ingrid's future was sealed from birth, promised to Prince Bjorn, a powerful alliance that would secure her family's status for generations. But fate has a way of defying even the most carefully laid plans. When a forbidden glance passes between the chieftain's daughter and Einar, a captured warrior now serving as a slave, something awakens that neither duty nor punishment can extinguish. As the crack of a whip echoes across the village square and Einar's blood stains the snow, Ingrid makes a choice that will shatter everything. She steps forward and demands mercy for a man she shouldn't even notice. What terrible secret connects the highborn lady and the mute slave? What price will they pay for a love that defies the sacred order of their world? As Prince Bjorn's cold eyes narrow with suspicion, one thing becomes terrifyingly clear. In a society where honor is everything, their forbidden connection could cost them not just their future, but their very lives. The crack of the whip sliced through the frigid morning air, sharp as the winter that gripped the Viking settlement. Each lash echoed across the village square, where a crowd had gathered like ravens around dying prey. Their breath formed clouds in the biting cold, rising up toward the steel-gray sky as they watched the punishment unfold. On his knees in the center of it all was Einar. His broad shoulders, once powerful and proud, now bent forward in submission. His naked back, exposed to both the elements and the merciless whip, bore fresh wounds that wept crimson tears onto the frozen ground beneath him. Yet through it all his eyes remained fixed downward, his jaw clenched in silent defiance. Among the sea of hardened faces, some twisted with disgust, others alive with cruel curiosity, stood Ingrid. Her pale complexion seemed almost translucent against the backdrop of fur-clad villagers, her golden hair catching what little sunlight broke through the clouds. As the daughter of the clan chieftain, she stood apart from the common folk, yet her status did nothing to mask the anguish in her ice-blue eyes. Another lash fell. Ingrid's fingers curled into tight fists at her sides, her nails digging half-moons into her palms. She bit her lower lip so hard she nearly drew blood, fighting the urge to scream, to run forward, to make it stop. But she remained frozen in place, a prisoner of her station, of expectations, of the cruel truth that she was promised to Prince Bjorn, heir to the most powerful clan in the north. "The slave has committed a crime against purity," declared the white-bearded elder, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "Let his punishment serve as a reminder that no man, free or bound, may violate our sacred traditions." What crime? Nobody dared ask. Some in the crowd whispered behind gloved hands. Others spat on the ground in contempt. A young woman giggled nervously until her mother silenced her with a sharp elbow to the ribs. But through it all, the elder never named the offense. Ingrid knew. The knowledge burned beneath her skin like embers, threatening to consume her from within. Each strike against Einar's flesh was truly meant for her as well, for what they had done, or rather, for what they had felt. Nothing more than a glance held too long, but in their world, even that was treachery. The whip rose again, its leather tongue stained dark with Einar's blood. The arm of the executioner, a mountain of a man with a face like carved stone, seemed tireless in its cruelty. Einar's body shuddered with each impact, yet he made no sound. His silence was more deafening than any scream could have been. Suddenly, something inside Ingrid snapped. Before her mind could catch up with her heart, she stepped forward. "Enough!" The word tore from her throat, startling even herself with its force. The executioner's arm froze mid-strike. The crowd fell into a deadly silence, more chilling than the winter air. Every eye turned toward her. The chieftain's daughter, the promised bride, the girl who had just committed the unthinkable act of interfering with justice. From the edge of the gathering, Prince Bjorn stepped forward. Tall and imposing in his fur-lined cloak with a golden band around his upper arm, signifying his royal blood, he moved through the parting crowd like a wolf through snow. His eyes, sharp and calculating, fixed upon Ingrid with a curiosity that bordered on predatory. "You show great concern for a slave," he said, his voice smooth as honey, yet laced with something darker. "Tell me, Lady Ingrid, what moves you to such compassion?" Ingrid swallowed hard. The crowd waited, hungry for her answer, for any explanation that might make sense of her outburst. But the words died in her throat as she realized there was no explanation she could give that wouldn't betray the truth. She began, her voice faltering. I believe justice has been served. He has learned his lesson. Bjorn's lips curled into the ghost of a smile, one that never reached his eyes. Justice is not measured by the comfort of witnesses, my lady, but by the debt owed. The tension stretched between them like a bowstring drawn too tight. And then, for the first time since his punishment began, Einar lifted his gaze from the ground. It happened in the space of a single heartbeat, his eyes, dark as midnight seas, meeting Ingrid's across the blood-stained snow. In that forbidden moment, something passed between them that no words could have expressed. Love, anguish, apology, defiance, all compressed into a single look that lasted no longer than the beat of a sparrow's wing. But it was enough. Prince Bjorn's gaze darted between them, catching the tail end of that silent exchange. His expression hardened, the curiosity in his eyes crystallizing into something far more dangerous. Without a word, he raised his hand, signaling the executioner to lower his whip. Perhaps Lady Ingrid is right, he announced to the crowd, though his eyes never left her face. We are not barbarians after all. The slave has been punished enough for today. Relief washed over Ingrid like a wave, nearly buckling her knees. But as the crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves, Bjorn approached her. He leaned close, his breath warm against her ear, and whispered words meant only for her. Whatever passes between you and that slave, I will discover it. And when I do, neither your father's position nor your beauty will save either of you. He pulled back, flashing her a smile that chilled her to the bone, before turning on his heel and striding away. Ingrid stood rooted to the spot, watching as two servants dragged Einar's battered body toward the slave's quarters. As they carried him past her, his eyes, now half closed in pain, found hers once more. And in that moment, Ingrid knew with terrible certainty that they had sealed their fate. 7 days had passed since the public punishment, yet the whispers persisted throughout the clan like a stubborn winter chill. In the great hall, around cooking fires and between the wooden huts, the incident had become the favorite morsel to chew upon. How the chieftain's daughter had interceded for a mere slave, and how strangely the prince had reacted. Ingrid moved through her daily duties like a ghost, present in body but distant in spirit. Her slender fingers worked the loom mechanically, weaving patterns her mother had taught her years before, but her mind continuously drifted to the image that haunted her sleep. Einar on his knees, blood streaming down his back, eyes finally lifting to meet hers in that forbidden moment of connection. You seem distracted, daughter. Her father's voice startled her from her thoughts. The chieftain, a broad-shouldered man with a silver-streaked beard and lines etched deeply around his eyes, regarded her with a mixture of concern and suspicion. The women say you've barely spoken since the punishment day. Ingrid's hand stilled on the loom. I am well, father. Perhaps just weary of winter's grip. He studied her face a moment longer, unconvinced. Prince Bjorn returns from his hunt today. You would do well to greet him with more warmth than you show now. She nodded, forcing her lips into what she hoped resembled a smile. Of course, father. When he had gone, Ingrid pressed her forehead against the cool wooden frame of the loom and closed her eyes. The wedding plans advanced like an unstoppable tide. Spring would bring not only thawed grounds but her binding to Bjorn, a union that would strengthen the clan and secure their future. A sensible arrangement that now felt like a noose tightening around her neck. By midday, the hunting party's horn sounded their triumphant return. From the doorway of her father's longhouse, Ingrid watched as Prince Bjorn dismounted his stallion, blood-spattered and victorious. 3 deer and a wild boar hung from poles carried by his men. The village erupted in cheers. Such bounty was rare in the late winter months. Bjorn's eyes found her immediately, as if drawn by some sixth sense. He strode toward her, still gripping his hunting spear, its tip darkened with dried blood. My lady, he said, bowing slightly, I trust you've missed me during these hunting days. The village always feels emptier without its warriors, she replied carefully, avoiding a direct answer. His smile didn't reach his eyes. And yet you seem preoccupied, not with thoughts of our wedding, I fear. Before she could formulate a response, a serving woman approached hesitantly, head bowed in deference. "My lady," the servant whispered, glancing nervously at the prince before continuing. "You asked to be informed about the condition of the one who was punished." Ingrid felt Bjorn's gaze sharpen on her face, but she kept her expression neutral. "Yes? He lives, my lady," the woman murmured, barely audible above the celebration around them. "But the healers say he has lost his voice, whether from the cold or—" She trailed off, unwilling to speak further with the prince so close. Ingrid felt as though she'd been struck. The news settled in her stomach like a stone, cold and immovable. She managed a slight nod of dismissal to the servant, aware of Bjorn watching her every reaction like a hawk studies its prey. "How unfortunate for the slave," he remarked coolly. "Though what need has a thrall for a voice? They are meant to work, not speak. Even slaves deserve mercy," she replied, the words escaping before she could trap them behind her teeth. Bjorn's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mercy is a luxury, not a right. Remember that, Ingrid." With a curt nod, he rejoined his hunting companions, leaving her with the weight of his suspicion. That night, after the feasting had ended and the village had fallen into drunken slumber, Ingrid slipped from her bed. Wrapping herself in a heavy woolen cloak, hood pulled low over her face, she made her way through the shadows toward the servants' quarters at the edge of the settlement. The snow crunched softly beneath her boots, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The moon hung full and bright, casting the world in silver and making her journey both easier and more dangerous. If anyone saw her, the slave's dwelling was little more than a long, low building with a thatched roof and walls that barely kept out the winter wind. No fires burned inside. Fuel was too precious to waste on thralls. She hesitated at the entrance, suddenly uncertain, then pushed the door open with trembling hands. Inside, bodies lay huddled together for warmth on straw pallets. In the dim light filtering through the doorway, she searched for him, heart pounding so loudly she feared it would wake the sleepers. Then she saw him, sitting apart from the others in a corner, his hands working methodically despite the late hour. He was mending a fishing net, his fingers moving with practiced precision even in the near darkness. When the door creaked, Einar looked up, startled. Recognition flashed across his features, followed immediately by alarm. He tried to stand, wincing as the movement pulled at his healing wounds. Ingrid quickly crossed to him, placing a hand on his shoulder to stop him from rising. The touch, brief though it was, sent a current through her body that had nothing to do with the cold. "Why didn't you say anything?" she whispered urgently, then realized the cruel irony of her question. Einar's eyes, dark and deep as a midnight fjord, held hers. There was no accusation in them, no anger, only a profound sadness that made her chest ache. Slowly, he reached down to the dirt floor beside his pallet and drew letters with his finger, Y-O-U-A-S-K-E-D. Confusion clouded her face until memory struck her like lightning. The day by the shore, months earlier, when she had warned him in a moment of fear. "Never look me in the eyes, Einar. If you do, you will die." She had been protecting them both, knowing what would happen if others noticed how they looked at each other, and he, loyal beyond reason, had kept his eyes downcast for weeks, until that fateful day when he had finally broken his silent promise and looked up at her in the village square. "I didn't mean—" she began, but the words dissolved on her tongue. What hadn't she meant? The warning had been real, the danger genuine. She just hadn't expected him to bear the punishment alone. Einar shook his head slightly as if to absolve her of guilt. He touched his throat, then made a cutting motion with his hand. "Your voice," she whispered. "Will it return?" He shrugged, the gesture eloquent in its uncertainty. Then he pointed to her, tilted his head questioningly. "I'm well enough," she answered, understanding his silent inquiry. Though the wedding preparations advance, Bjorn returned from his hunt today. At the mention of the prince, Einar's expression darkened. He wrote again in the dirt, D-A-N-G-E-R. "I know," she murmured, glancing nervously toward the door. He suspects something. I shouldn't be here, but I had to see. Her voice caught. I had to know you survived. A soft sound escaped him then, not quite a word, more a rough exhalation that might have been a laugh if it weren't so painful to hear. He pointed to himself, then made a motion like waves on the sea. You endure, she translated, like water over stone. He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the corners of the building and sending a draft skittering across the floor. The cold breeze carried another sound with it, footsteps in the snow approaching steadily. Ingrid's eyes widened in alarm. Einar heard it too. He quickly erased his writings in the dirt with one sweep of his hand, then gestured urgently toward a small window at the back of the building. I'll return, she whispered, already moving toward the escape route. Stay safe, Einar. As she slipped through the window into the night, Ingrid didn't see the figure watching from the shadows, tracking her footprints in the pristine snow that led from the slave quarters directly back to the chieftain's house. Prince Bjorn stood motionless, his breath freezing in the air before him, his eyes hard as flint in the moonlight. The door to the slave quarters swung open without warning, sending a rush of freezing air through the cramped space. Silhouetted against the moonlit snow stood Prince Bjorn, his imposing frame filling the entrance completely. The sleeping thralls stirred but dared not rise, all except Einar, who remained seated, his hands frozen mid-task on the fishing net. Ingrid's heart lodged in her throat. She had barely managed to duck behind a stack of empty grain barrels when the prince entered. Now she was trapped, forced to witness whatever was about to unfold while praying to the gods she wouldn't be discovered. Well, well, Bjorn's voice cut through the tense silence. What an industrious slave you are, working while others sleep. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. In the dim light filtering through cracks in the walls, his face appeared mask-like, features arranged in an expression of cordial interest that didn't reach his eyes. Those remained cold as fjord water in winter. Einar lowered his gaze immediately, setting aside his work with deliberate care. No need for such deference now, Bjorn said, his tone deceptively light. After all, you've already broken that particular rule, haven't you? He moved closer, circling Einar like a wolf stalking wounded prey. I wonder what else you've dared to do. From her hiding place, Ingrid held her breath, every muscle tensed for flight. One wrong move, one sound, and all would be lost. Bjorn crouched suddenly, bringing his face level with Einar's. Strange that the daughter of our chieftain would concern herself with your welfare. Stranger still that she would visit you in the dead of night. Einar remained perfectly still, neither confirming nor denying the accusation. His silence seemed to irritate the prince more than any protest might have done. Look at me when I speak to you, thrall, Bjorn commanded. Slowly, reluctantly, Einar raised his eyes to meet the prince's. What passed between the two men in that moment was something primal, a challenge, an assessment, the recognition of a rival. That's better, Bjorn murmured. Now I see what she might find appealing. There's something in your eyes that doesn't belong in a slave. Pride, perhaps, or defiance. His lips curved in a smile that was all teeth. Both can be broken, of course. He straightened, clasping his hands behind his back as he continued his predatory circuit around Einar. She came to check if you still served the clan, did she? What remarkable compassion from a woman who has never once looked at her betrothed with such fervor. The words were a blade, expertly wielded to cut deep. Einar's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his composure, gaze now fixed straight ahead. I've been thinking, Bjorn continued, his voice taking on a contemplative quality that was somehow more menacing than outright threat. Ingrid requires protection. As her future husband, it's my duty to ensure her safety until our wedding day. He paused directly in front of Einar. And who better to guard her than someone who clearly values her well-being so passionately? Einar's brow furrowed slightly, the only sign of his confusion. From tomorrow, you will serve as Lady Ingrid's personal guard, Bjorn declared. You will accompany her everywhere. You will assist her in all things. You will be her shadow. His smile widened, revealing the trap beneath the apparent generosity. Consider it an honor. Few slaves rise to such a position of trust. The other thralls, pretending sleep but listening intently, stirred with surprised murmurs. A slave as personal guard to the chieftain's daughter? Unheard of. "Oh, and one more thing," Bjorn added, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "If I ever suspect that your service extends beyond what is proper, I'll have your hands before I take your head." "Understood." Einar gave a single, grave nod. "Excellent." Bjorn straightened, adjusting his fur cloak with casual elegance. "Rest well. Your new duties begin at dawn." With that, he turned and left, the door banging shut behind him. The sudden silence felt heavy as a burial shroud. Ingrid waited, heart hammering against her ribs, until she was certain Bjorn had truly gone before emerging from her hiding place. The other slaves quickly closed their eyes, pretending not to see her. A kindness born of self-preservation rather than loyalty. None wished to be implicated in whatever was transpiring between the chieftain's daughter and the mute thrall. She crossed to Einar, who remained seated, his expression unreadable in the gloom. "This is my fault," she whispered. "He's using you to trap us both." Einar shook his head slightly, then pointed to himself and made a protective gesture toward her. "You cannot protect me from him," she argued. "This is just another form of punishment. He'll be watching our every move, waiting for any excuse." Einar pressed a finger gently to her lips, silencing her. His eyes conveyed what his lost voice could not. He would endure this test as he had endured the whip, with dignity, with resolve, with the quiet strength that had first drawn her to him. "I should never have come," she said, voice catching. "I've only made things worse." He took her hand then, a gesture so bold it momentarily shocked them both. His calloused palm against her soft one, fingers intertwining for the briefest of moments before propriety and fear forced them apart again. No words were needed. In that touch lay every forbidden feeling, every unspoken promise, every impossible hope. "Be careful," she whispered, withdrawing toward the window. "He means to destroy us both." Dawn arrived with brutal swiftness, bringing with it Einar's new role as Ingrid's designated guardian. The arrangement quickly became the subject of intense speculation throughout the settlement. Some whispered that Prince Bjorn was testing the slave's loyalty before the wedding. Others suggested it was a cruel jest, forcing a thrall to protect the very woman he could never hope to have. The more astute among them recognized it for what it truly was, a snare, baited and set with deadly patience. For Ingrid and Einar, each day became an exquisite torture. He stood silently behind her during meals, handed her items when required, escorted her between buildings, always close, yet separated by an unbridgeable gulf of status and circumstance. Every interaction observed, every glance measured, every moment together a step closer to disaster. Bjorn watched it all with calculating eyes, sometimes openly, often from hidden vantage points. He noted how Ingrid's fingers trembled slightly when Einar handed her a drinking horn, how the slave's gaze would fix on a point just past her shoulder rather than risk meeting her eyes directly, how both seemed to hold their breath when forced into proximity. 3 days into this arrangement, Ingrid sat in her private chamber, struggling with a stubborn knot in her embroidery thread. Einar stood guard by the door, back straight, eyes forward, the perfect image of a dutiful servant, save for the tension evident in his jawline. "Einar," she said finally, breaking the heavy silence, "I need your assistance." He approached cautiously, maintaining a respectful distance as he awaited her command. "This knot," she explained, holding up the tangled thread. "My fingers are too clumsy today." He knelt beside her stool, taking the embroidery frame from her hands. As he worked at the knot with deft fingers, Ingrid studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the furrow of concentration between his brows, the scar at his temple from some long-ago battle. So close she could feel the warmth radiating from him, yet so impossibly distant in every way that mattered. The knot suddenly gave way under his ministrations. As he handed the frame back to her, a piece of her clothing slipped from her lap, falling to the rush-covered floor between them. Both reached for it simultaneously, hands colliding in the space between. The contact lasted only a heartbeat, skin against skin, warm and electric, but in that fleeting touch was contained every unspoken word, every suppressed desire, every forbidden dream. Ingrid drew back as if burned, her cheeks flushing crimson. Einar's eyes met hers for the first time in days, dark with emotions he dared not express. Neither noticed the shadow that passed across the small window overlooking the courtyard, nor the pair of ice-blue eyes that narrowed at the witnessed exchange. Outside, Bjorn's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth whatsoever, his breath frosting in the air as he turned away. That night, as the settlement prepared for sleep, a messenger approached Einar as he stood guard outside Ingrid's quarters. The man spoke in hushed tones. "Prince Bjorn commands your presence in his tent. Now." Einar's expression betrayed nothing as he nodded his understanding. With one last glance at Ingrid's door, he followed the messenger into the darkness, his footprints in the snow marking a path toward judgment. No one saw him leave the prince's tent. No one saw where he went afterward. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Ingrid waited by her window, anxiety growing with each passing hour. Einar did not return. Einar knelt on the fur-lined floor of Bjorn's tent, the warmth of the central fire doing nothing to thaw the chill that had settled in his bones. The prince's private quarters reflected his status. Weapons of fine craftsmanship adorned the walls. Silver cups gleamed in the firelight, and the air carried the rich scent of cedar and amber incense brought from distant trading posts. Bjorn himself stood with his back to Einar, silhouetted against the flames as he poured mead into two ornate drinking horns. His movements were unhurried, deliberate, like a man who knew the value of anticipation in breaking another's resolve. "Do you know why I've summoned you?" he finally asked, not turning around. Einar remained silent, his muteness now a shield rather than a wound. "Ah, yes," Bjorn chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "How convenient that you cannot speak, cannot defend yourself, cannot confess." He turned then, crossing the space between them with measured steps. "But there are other ways to reveal the truth." He extended one of the drinking horns toward Einar, who hesitated before accepting it with both hands, as custom dictated. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and Bjorn's eyes narrowed slightly, searching Einar's face for any reaction. "Drink," he commanded. Einar raised the horn to his lips and took a cautious sip. The mead was sweet but carried a bitter aftertaste he couldn't identify. "All of it," Bjorn insisted, watching intently. Einar complied, draining the horn as etiquette demanded when drinking with one's superior. Whatever game the prince was playing, refusing would only confirm suspicions he couldn't afford to validate. Bjorn took the empty vessel and set it aside, then drew something from his belt, a finely crafted dagger with a bone handle and a blade that caught the firelight like a sliver of ice. He held it out, handle first, toward the kneeling man. "Take it," he said, his voice soft yet edged with steel. Einar accepted the weapon, its weight familiar in his hand. Before his capture and enslavement, he had been a warrior in his own right. The feel of a blade, even one this small, awakened memories of a freedom long lost. "Now," Bjorn continued, crouching to bring his face level with Einar's, "prove your loyalty. Hurt that which causes you weakness." Confusion flickered across Einar's features. He glanced down at the dagger, then back at the prince, a question in his eyes. Bjorn's lips curled into a cold smile. "Don't pretend ignorance. I speak of what lies between you and what can never be yours." His voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "I speak of your feelings for my bride." Understanding dawned on Einar's face, followed by a stillness that went beyond his usual silence. The dagger remained motionless in his hand. "Cut it out," Bjorn urged, his tone almost hypnotic. "Whatever grows in your heart for her, cut it out. Show me you can be trusted as her guard by destroying what threatens her honor." The firelight played across Einar's features as he stared at the blade. Seconds stretched into an unbearable tension, the only sound the occasional crack of burning logs and the measured breathing of the two men. Einar did not move. "Ah, so it is true," Bjorn said, straightening. The pretense of civility fell away, revealing the raw contempt beneath. "You love her." The words hung in the air between them, an accusation that needed no denial or confirmation. Einar's very stillness was answer enough. Bjorn began to pace, his shadow dancing grotesquely on the tent walls. A slave, a mute, a nothing. Each word was a lash. "You dare to raise your eyes to the daughter of a chieftain? To the woman promised to me?" He stopped abruptly, looming over Einar, who remained kneeling, the dagger still clutched in his hand. "Strike yourself," Bjorn commanded. "Show me that you understand your place in this world. One cut, across your chest. Prove that you acknowledge the impossibility of what you desire." Einar's gaze lifted slowly to meet the prince's. In those dark eyes burned not submission, but a quiet defiance that needed no voice to express itself. He made no move to obey. Bjorn's facade cracked then, rage contorting his handsome features. He struck without warning, the back of his hand connecting with Einar's face with enough force to send him sprawling onto the furs. The dagger clattered from his grasp. "You forget yourself, thrall," Bjorn spat, retrieving the weapon. "I could end your miserable life with a word. I could have you flayed alive for the audacity of your silence." Einar pushed himself back to a kneeling position, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. Still, he made no sound, his eyes never leaving the prince's. "But that would be too simple, wouldn't it?" Bjorn continued, his fury cooling into something more calculated. "Too quick. No, I think you both deserve to suffer more. Creatively." He circled Einar like a predator, the dagger dancing between his fingers. "She pities you, you know. That's all it is. Pity for the poor, broken slave who follows her like a beaten hound." He leaned close, his breath hot against Einar's ear. "She could never love something like you." Something flickered across Einar's face then. Not anger, not even pain, but a deep sadness that momentarily disarmed the prince. It was the look of a man who had already considered this possibility 1,000 times and accepted it as truth. Bjorn stepped back, momentarily disconcerted. This was not the reaction he had expected. He had anticipated rage, jealousy, the blind desperation of unrequited love, not this dignified sorrow that somehow made him feel small despite his power. "Get out," he said finally, tossing the dagger onto a nearby table. "Take your pathetic devotion and get out of my sight." Einar rose silently, bowing his head in the required gesture of respect, before turning to leave. As he reached the tent entrance, Bjorn's voice stopped him. "One more thing, slave." The prince's tone had regained its dangerous edge. "When you return to her, remember that every moment you spend in her presence is by my permission alone. Remember that I see everything, and remember that when she becomes my wife, you will watch as I claim what you have only dared to dream of." Einar's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly, the only sign that the barbed words had found their mark. Then, without turning, he pushed through the tent flap and disappeared into the night. Outside, snow had begun to fall, thick flakes swirling in the darkness. Einar stood for a moment, face tilted upward, letting the cold touch his bruised skin. His breath formed clouds that dissipated into the blackness above. In his hand, hidden in the folds of his rough tunic, he clutched something tightly, the dagger he had swept from the table when Bjorn wasn't looking. Meanwhile, Ingrid waited in her chamber, each passing hour heightening her anxiety. She paced the small room, pausing occasionally to peer through the shutters at the swirling snow, searching for any sign of Einar's return. The fire in her hearth had burned down to glowing embers, casting the room in a dim, reddish light that did nothing to dispel the chill of foreboding that had settled over her. What was Bjorn doing? What new cruelty had he devised? The questions circled her mind like ravens over a battlefield, offering no peace. When the door finally creaked open, she spun around, relief flooding her features, only to freeze at the sight before her. Einar stood in the doorway, snow melting in his hair, a dark bruise forming on his cheekbone, and his eyes filled with a sorrow that made her heart contract painfully in her chest. "What did he do to you?" she whispered, rushing forward before remembering herself and stopping short of touching him. Einar closed the door quietly behind him and withdrew something from his tunic, the dagger, its bone handle gleaming in the dim light. He held it out to her, handle first. Ingrid stared at the weapon, uncomprehending. "I don't understand." Slowly, deliberately, Einar mimed the action of stabbing his own heart, then pointed to her, his eyes never leaving hers. "He wanted you to hurt yourself because of me," she breathed, horror dawning on her face. Einar nodded once. "But you didn't," she said, noticing his unmarked tunic. He shook his head, then gestured toward the dagger again, offering it to her as if presenting something precious rather than deadly. Understanding blossomed in her eyes. He had refused to renounce his feelings, even under threat. He had chosen pain and punishment over betraying his own heart. And now he offered her the weapon, and with it, a choice. The unspoken question hung between them. Would she be as brave? Ingrid's fingers trembled as she took the dagger, its weight unfamiliar in her hand. For a long moment, she simply held it, tears welling in her eyes. "How long can we endure this?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. Snow continued to fall outside, muffling the world in white silence. Time seemed suspended as they stood there, the forbidden truth of their feelings exposed by Bjorn's cruel test, yet somehow made stronger for having survived it. Neither knew that by dawn, their ordeal would only intensify. Neither knew that the prince had already set in motion events that would force them to choose between love and survival. Neither knew that in just 3 days' time, their world would change forever. The morning light filtered weakly through the thick cloud cover, casting the settlement in a gray haze that matched Ingrid's mood. She had barely slept, the dagger Einar had given her now hidden beneath her bed furs, its presence both a comfort and a reminder of the danger they faced. When she finally emerged from her chamber, she found not Einar, but one of her father's guards stationed outside her door. "Where is my assigned protector?" she asked, trying to keep the alarm from her voice. The guard avoided her eyes. "Prince Bjorn has given him other duties this morning, my lady." A cold dread settled in her stomach. "What duties?" "I was not told, my lady." Ingrid rushed through her morning ablutions, her mind racing with possibilities, each more terrible than the last. As she crossed the main hall, she caught sight of her father in deep conversation with several elders. Their expressions were grave, their voices hushed. When they noticed her approach, they fell silent, exchanging glances that only heightened her suspicion. "Father," she said, dispensing with formal greetings, "I must speak with you." The chieftain dismissed the elders with a nod before turning to his daughter, his weathered face unreadable. "What troubles you, child?" "My guard," she said. "The slave. Where is he?" Something flickered across her father's features, discomfort perhaps, or resignation. "Come," he said simply, leading her to a small antechamber off the main hall where they could speak privately. Once inside, he closed the heavy wooden door and turned to face her. "You should not concern yourself with the fate of slaves, Ingrid. It is beneath your station." "Where is he?" she repeated, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain calm. Her father sighed heavily, the sound of a man carrying a burden he would rather set down. "Prince Bjorn came to me before dawn. He expressed concerns about the slaves' loyalties." "What concerns?" The question came out sharper than she intended. Her father's gaze hardened. "Do not take that tone with me, daughter. I am still your chieftain as well as your father." Ingrid forced herself to lower her eyes in deference, though everything within her rebelled against the submission. "Forgive me, father. I merely wish to understand." The chieftain studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "Bjorn believes the slave harbors inappropriate feelings toward you." The words struck like a physical blow, though she had expected them. "And you believed him? On what evidence?" "The prince has observed certain looks, certain behaviors that suggest a familiarity beyond what is proper between a noblewoman and a thrall." Her father's voice remained steady, but she could sense his discomfort. "And your own unusual interest in his welfare does nothing to dispel such concerns." Ingrid felt her face grow hot. "I merely showed compassion to someone who was cruelly punished. Is kindness now a crime in our clan?" "Kindness has its place," her father replied, "but so do boundaries. You are promised to Prince Bjorn. In less than a week, you will be his wife. Your actions reflect not only on yourself, but on our entire family and clan." "And what has been done with the slave?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice even. Her father turned away, moving toward the small window that overlooked the fjord. Bjorn suggested he be sent north to work in the mines. The blood drained from Ingrid's face. The northern mines were a death sentence. Few survived more than a season in those dark, cold caverns where men were worked until they collapsed, then discarded like broken tools. "No," she whispered. "Father, you cannot. It is already done." The words fell like stones between them. The ship departed with the morning tide. It was Bjorn's right as your future husband to make such a decision regarding your household. Something inside Ingrid shattered. Without thought for propriety or consequence, she rushed to her father, grabbing his arm and forcing him to face her. "How could you allow this?" she demanded, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. He was innocent of any wrongdoing. He was mute, defenseless. "Enough!" Her father's voice cut through her pleas like a blade. "Your reaction only confirms Bjorn's suspicions. What is this slave to you that you would challenge your chieftain and disgrace yourself thus?" The question hung in the air between them, dangerous in its directness. Ingrid released her grip on his arm, stepping back as the full weight of their situation crashed down upon her. "He saved my life once," she said quietly, offering a partial truth. "Last autumn, when I walked too far along the cliffs. I slipped, and he pulled me to safety before anyone knew I was in danger. I owed him a debt." Her father's expression softened slightly. "Why did you not speak of this before?" "I was ashamed of my carelessness," she lied, "and I did not wish to cause trouble for someone who had shown loyalty." The chieftain studied her face, searching for signs of deception. Whatever he saw there, he chose not to press further. "What's done is done, Ingrid. The ship has sailed. You must now focus on your future with Prince Bjorn." "When did they leave?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "At first light," he replied, turning back to the window. "They will reach the northern settlements in 3 days' time, weather permitting." 3 days. The knowledge settled like ice in her veins. Without another word, she bowed her head in the expected gesture of filial obedience and left the chamber, each step requiring all her will not to break into a run. Once outside the hall, Ingrid abandoned all pretense of calm. She raced to the stables, ignoring the startled looks from servants and clan members alike. Her heart pounded in her ears, drowning out rational thought. All she knew was that she had to reach the shore, had to see with her own eyes that the ship had truly sailed, that Einar was beyond her reach. The stable boy jumped to his feet as she burst through the door. "My lady?" "Saddle my horse," she commanded. "Now." The urgency in her voice brooked no argument. Within moments, she was mounted and galloping through the settlement, her cloak billowing behind her like the wings of a desperate bird. The path to the fjord was steep and treacherous, especially with patches of ice still clinging to the shadows. But she urged her mount on recklessly, heedless of the danger. By the time she reached the water's edge, her horse was lathered with sweat despite the cold, its sides heaving. Ingrid slid from the saddle, legs nearly buckling beneath her as she staggered to the shoreline. The fjord stretched before her, steel blue and vast. In the distance, a ship's sail caught what little sunlight penetrated the clouds, a small white square growing ever smaller against the dark mountains beyond. She had arrived too late. "Einar!" she screamed, the name torn from her throat by the bitter wind. "Einar!" But her voice was nothing against the vastness of the fjord, the roar of waves against the rocks. The ship continued its steady progress, unaware or uncaring of the woman on the shore who called out with all the strength her breaking heart could muster. Ingrid sank to her knees in the wet snow, tears streaming down her face as she watched the vessel that carried away the man she loved. In that moment of raw despair, she forgot all caution, all the careful pretense she had maintained. She forgot that she was the chieftain's daughter, promised to a prince. She was simply a woman watching her heart sail beyond her reach. On the deck of the departing ship, a solitary figure stood at the stern, face turned toward the diminishing shoreline. Einar's keen eyes had spotted the lone rider galloping down to the water's edge. He had recognized the golden hair streaming in the wind, had seen her fall to her knees in the snow. Too far to distinguish her features clearly, yet he knew every line of her face by heart, could imagine the anguish written there. His hands gripped the ship's rail, knuckles white with the effort it took not to throw himself overboard in a futile attempt to swim back to her. The guards had bound his wrists with rope for the journey, but one of the older servants, a man who had known Einar before his capture and enslavement, had loosened his bonds enough to allow him movement on deck, a small mercy in the face of his bleak future. As the distance between them grew, Einar raised his face to the pale winter sun, eyes closed, letting the salt wind carry away the single tear that escaped his rigid control. In that moment, his eyes conveyed everything words never could. Love, farewell, forgiveness. A silent promise that no matter what awaited him in the northern mines, he would carry her in his heart until his final breath. From the shoreline, Ingrid watched the ship grow smaller until it was merely a speck against the horizon. She might have remained there until nightfall had something in the waves not caught her eye, a small object tossed by the tide, washing up almost at her feet. With trembling hands, she reached for it. A wooden talisman, crudely carved yet beautiful in its simplicity. She recognized it immediately as the charm Einar had always kept hidden beneath his tunic, a remembrance from his life before captivity. Turning it over in her palm, she discovered markings scratched into its surface, runes, freshly carved, still sharp against the weathered wood. "Wait for me at the solstice." 5 simple words that rekindled the ember of hope in her frozen heart. She clutched the talisman to her chest, a new resolve hardening within her. No matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter what schemes Bjorn might devise, she would find a way to endure until the solstice. For the first time since learning of Einar's fate, Ingrid rose to her feet, her gaze fixed on the horizon where ship and sky merged into one. The wind whipped her hair around her face, drying the tears on her cheeks. "I will wait," she whispered, the promise carried away on the breath of the fjord. "I will wait." 4 months passed like a slow tide of misery. Spring had arrived in the fjords, melting the ice that had gripped the land for so long, yet Ingrid felt no warmth in her heart. Each day she performed her duties as the chieftain's daughter with mechanical precision, her eyes fixed on some distant horizon that others could not see. The talisman remained hidden beneath her clothes, pressed against her skin, a constant reminder of the promise she clung to with desperate faith. The settlement buzzed with activity as preparations for her wedding to Prince Bjorn reached fever pitch. Fabrics were dyed, meats smoked, mead brewed. Gifts arrived from neighboring clans, tribute to the powerful alliance about to be forged. Through it all, Ingrid moved like a wraith, present in body but absent in spirit. On a rain-soaked afternoon, 3 days before the ceremony was to take place, horns sounded from the watchtower. A war party was returning, Prince Bjorn's men, back from a raid on southern territories. The villagers gathered at the gates, eager for news of victory and plunder. Ingrid stood beside her father on the steps of the great hall, her face a carefully composed mask as she awaited her betrothed's arrival. The warriors came into view, their shields and spears gleaming dully in the rain. At their head rode Bjorn, resplendent in battle gear adorned with new silver ornaments, spoils of his conquest. His face bore a fresh scar across his cheek, adding to his fearsome appearance. The crowd cheered as he dismounted, holding aloft a cloth bag that presumably contained valuable treasures. But it was not the prince who drew Ingrid's attention. Among the weary warriors and bound captives that followed, a solitary figure walked with head bowed and shoulders slumped. A man whose very posture she would recognize even if the rest of the world turned to shadow. Einar. Her heart lurched painfully in her chest, a wild bird suddenly caged. She gripped the wooden railing before her to steady herself, knuckles whitening with the effort of maintaining her composure. He was alive. Somehow, against all odds, he had returned. But the man who trudged through the mud behind Bjorn's warriors was barely recognizable as the Einar she had known. His body was gaunt, his once proud shoulders now bent as if carrying an invisible weight. New scars marked his exposed forearms, telling silent stories of the brutality he had endured in the northern mines. His hair, once the color of rich earth, now hung lank and dull around a face that had aged years in mere months. As the procession reached the steps, Bjorn ascended to greet the chieftain, clasping arms with his future father-in-law in the traditional warrior's greeting. "A successful campaign," the prince announced, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "The southern clans have learned the cost of defying us. Their treasures are now ours, their warriors slain or enslaved." Ingrid's father nodded approvingly. "You honor our clan with your victories, Prince Bjorn." "And tomorrow," Bjorn continued, turning to face Ingrid with a smile that did not reach his eyes, "I claim my greatest prize." The crowd cheered again, but Ingrid barely heard them. Her gaze had locked onto Einar, who stood motionless in the rain, eyes fixed on the ground before him. As if sensing her attention, he lifted his head slightly, just enough for their eyes to meet across the distance that separated them. The shock of recognition that passed between them was like lightning, immediate, electric, and devastating in its intensity. She saw in his eyes not the broken shell of a man she had feared to find, but a flame that still burned despite all efforts to extinguish it. Then, as quickly as it had happened, the connection broke. Einar lowered his gaze once more, the perfect image of a subjugated thrall. Bjorn, ever watchful, caught the exchange. His smile widened, taking on a cruel edge as he gestured toward Einar. "I've brought back an old acquaintance," he announced, loud enough for all to hear. "The mute slave who once served as Lady Ingrid's guard. He has proven surprisingly resilient in the northern mines, outlasting men twice his size." The prince's tone suggested this was more irritation than accomplishment. "I thought he might serve a purpose at our wedding feast tomorrow." Ingrid's father frowned. "What purpose could such a wretch serve at a noble celebration?" "Why, to serve the bridal cup, of course," Bjorn replied with false lightness. "A reminder of the proper order of things, the lowest of thralls serving the highest of unions." The implication was clear to Ingrid, if not to the others, a final humiliation, forcing Einar to bear witness to her marriage to another man. A calculated cruelty designed to break whatever remained of the bond between them. "A strange whim," her father remarked, "but it is your right as bridegroom to choose the servants for the feast." Bjorn inclined his head in acknowledgement before turning back to address the crowd. "Tomorrow's celebration will be remembered for generations to come. Let none say that Prince Bjorn does not honor his bride with the finest of weddings." More cheers erupted as Bjorn took Ingrid's hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture of courtly affection that made her skin crawl beneath her forced smile. As the crowd began to disperse, slaves and servants were directed to unload the spoils of war. Einar was marched away with the other captives, disappearing into the throng without a backward glance. That night, Ingrid paced her chamber like a caged wolf, the walls closing in around her with each passing hour. The wedding preparations continued outside her door, servants hurrying with final arrangements, women giggling as they prepared her bridal clothes, musicians practicing the traditional songs that would accompany her union to a man she now despised with every fiber of her being. Sleep evaded her completely. As the settlement gradually quieted and the midnight hour approached, she found herself drawn to her window, staring out at the sliver of moon that hung above the fjord. The same moon, she thought, that would be shining on Einar wherever they had taken him to spend his last night before being forced to witness her wedding. A soft sound at her door startled her from her reverie, not a knock but a gentle scraping, as if something had been dragged across the wood. Heart pounding, Ingrid crossed the room and carefully pulled the door open a crack. The corridor was empty, but on the floor lay a small bundle wrapped in coarse cloth. Glancing quickly in both directions to ensure she was unobserved, Ingrid retrieved the package and retreated into her chamber, securing the door behind her. With trembling fingers, she unwrapped the cloth. Inside lay a broken cup, one half of a drinking vessel that had been deliberately snapped in two. She recognized it instantly as one of the ceremonial cups used in wedding rituals, meant to be shared between bride and groom. And beside it, a small stone bearing a single rune etched into its surface. Escape. Ingrid's breath caught in her throat. She knew with absolute certainty who had left this message, even without a name or mark to identify the sender. Einar had somehow managed to find a way to communicate with her. even under the watchful eyes of Bjorn's guards. But what did it mean? Was he suggesting she flee before the ceremony? Or was there some plan in motion that she had yet to discover? The broken cup seemed symbolic. A marriage interrupted, perhaps, or a bond that could not be completed. Lost in thought, she nearly missed the soft footsteps that passed her door, moving stealthily down the corridor. Acting on instinct rather than reason, Ingrid slipped the stone into her pocket, tucked the broken cup beneath her bed furs, and eased her door open once more. A shadow disappeared around the corner at the far end of the hallway, a figure moving with the practiced silence of one accustomed to avoiding detection. Without conscious decision, Ingrid followed, her bare feet making no sound on the wooden floor as she traced the mysterious visitor's path through the sleeping household. The shadow led her down rarely used servants' passages, through the back of the great hall, and eventually into a narrow corridor that connected to the storage rooms beneath the main structure. Here, the air was cool and damp, heavy with the scent of preserved foods and aging mead. Ingrid hesitated at the top of the worn stone steps that descended into darkness, straining to hear any sound that might guide her. A faint glow emanated from one of the chambers below, not the steady light of a proper torch, but the flickering illumination of a small rushlight, barely enough to see by. Drawing her shawl more tightly around her shoulders, Ingrid descended the steps, each footfall carefully placed to avoid betraying her presence. When she reached the source of the light, her heart nearly stopped. There, in the shadows of the mead storage room, stood Einar. His back was to her, shoulders tense as he studied something scratched into the earthen wall. The meager light cast his silhouette in sharp relief against the darkness, transforming him into something almost mythic, a figure balanced between worlds. "Einar," she whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. He turned sharply, eyes widening in alarm as he recognized her. For a moment neither moved, the space between them charged with all that remained unsaid. Then, in two swift strides, he crossed to her and placed a finger gently against her lips, his eyes darting toward the door with unmistakable warning. They were not alone. As if summoned by the thought, a third figure materialized from the shadows of the corridor beyond. Prince Bjorn, his face a mask of cold triumph as he observed the tableau before him. "What a touching reunion," he said, his voice soft yet filled with menace. "Exactly as I predicted." The stone walls of the tower room seemed to close in around Ingrid as the hours of her confinement stretched endlessly. After discovering her with Einar in the storage chamber, Bjorn had wasted no time. Guards had seized them both. Ingrid handled with reluctant deference befitting her station, Einar with brutal efficiency that left fresh blood trickling from his reopened wounds. The prince had ordered her locked in the western tower until dawn, when, he promised with chilling calm, she would face judgment before the entire clan for her disgrace. Moonlight filtered through the narrow window, casting long shadows across the bare floor where she now sat, back against the wall, knees drawn to her chest. The wedding finery that had been prepared with such care lay forgotten in her chambers, while here, in this cold prison, she awaited a fate that would shatter not just her future, but the alliance between clans that her father had spent years cultivating. Her thoughts turned constantly to Einar. What punishment had Bjorn devised for him? The prince's hatred had been building for months, festering like a wound that would not heal. Now, with evidence of their forbidden connection laid bare, that hatred would find its outlet in the cruelest vengeance imaginable. A scraping sound at the door startled her from her dark reverie. The heavy wooden bar that secured her prison from the outside was being moved. Ingrid rose quickly to her feet, smoothing her rumpled dress with trembling hands, determined to face whatever came next with whatever dignity she could muster. The door swung open to reveal not the guards she expected, but a solitary figure that made her heart leap painfully in her chest. "Einar," she gasped, scarcely believing her eyes. He slipped into the room like a shadow, closing the door softly behind him. In his hand gleamed a key, stolen or borrowed, she couldn't tell, and his expression held an urgency that sent a chill through her blood. Ingrid rushed forward, stopping just short of embracing him. Even now, even here, some deeply ingrained sense of propriety held her back. though every fiber of her being cried out for the comfort of his touch. "How did you escape?" she whispered, scanning his face in the dim light. Fresh bruises marred his jaw, and a cut above his eye had crusted with dried blood. Einar shook his head dismissively, as if his own suffering were of no consequence. He pointed to the door, then made a sweeping gesture toward the window, his meaning clear. They needed to leave, and quickly. "They'll hunt us," Ingrid said, the reality of their situation crashing down upon her. "Bjorn will never stop until he finds us both." Einar's eyes met hers, holding her gaze with an intensity that spoke volumes where his voice could not. He placed a hand over his heart, then extended it toward her, a silent pledge of protection, of devotion, of a future worth risking everything to claim. Tears welled in Ingrid's eyes, but she blinked them away resolutely. This was no time for weakness. She nodded once, decision made. "Let me gather something warmer to wear," she said, already moving toward the small chest that contained the few possessions her captors had permitted her. From beneath a folded cloak, she withdrew the broken cup and the rune stone Einar had smuggled to her earlier. "Your message," she said, holding them up. "I understood." A flicker of something like hope crossed his face, the first she had seen since his return. He took the broken cup from her hands, tucking it carefully inside his tunic, close to his heart. With the speed born of desperation, they prepared for flight. Ingrid donned her warmest cloak while Einar fashioned a crude rope from the bed linens. The tower's height made climbing down impossible, but the adjacent kitchen roof, if they could reach it, would provide a route to the ground that might avoid the guards posted at the base of the stairs. As Einar secured the makeshift rope to the window's iron bars, Ingrid touched his arm, drawing his attention. "I cannot lose you again," she whispered, the admission torn from the deepest part of her soul. He paused in his work, turning to face her fully. In the silvered darkness, his eyes held hers as his hand reached up to gently touch her cheek, fingertips tracing the curve of her face as if memorizing it by touch. He then tapped his chest and made a crossing motion over his heart, the most solemn vow a warrior could make without words. "You will not." The promise hung between them, fragile yet powerful. Then, with renewed purpose, Einar returned to his task, testing the strength of their escape route with a sharp tug. The descent from the tower window was treacherous. The rough woven rope bit into Ingrid's palms as she lowered herself inch by careful inch, the wind whipping her cloak around her legs, threatening to unbalance her. Above, Einar kept watch, waiting until she had safely reached the kitchen roof before beginning his own descent. The night enfolded them in its protective darkness as they crept across the settlement, avoiding the torch-lit paths where guards patrolled. Their progress was painfully slow, each step calculated, each shadow evaluated for the shelter it might provide. Twice they froze in place as drunken revelers stumbled past, warriors celebrating the eve of what should have been a wedding feast. At last, they reached the edge of the forest that bordered the northern boundary of the settlement. Here, the trees stood like silent sentinels, offering the promise of concealment as they fled into the wilderness beyond. Einar led the way, his hunter's instinct guiding them along barely visible game trails, moving ever deeper into the primeval wood. The journey was punishing. Hours passed as they pushed through underbrush, forded icy streams, and navigated treacherous slopes. Ingrid's sheltered life had not prepared her for such hardship, but determination drove her forward when strength began to fail. Einar remained vigilant, pausing occasionally to listen for sounds of pursuit, his body tense as a drawn bowstring. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, they had covered several miles of difficult terrain. Exhaustion tugged at Ingrid's limbs, making each step an act of will. Einar too showed signs of fatigue, his movements becoming less fluid, more deliberate. They reached a small clearing where a rock formation created a natural shelter, partially hidden by dense undergrowth. Einar gestured for her to rest while he scouted the perimeter, ensuring they had not been followed. Ingrid sank gratefully to the ground, her legs trembling with exertion, her lungs burning from the cold air and relentless pace. When Einar returned moments later, his expression was grim. He pointed back the way they had come, then held up 5 fingers before making a gesture that mimicked drawing a bow. 5 archers, Ingrid translated, her heart sinking. They've found our trail already. Einar nodded, his jaw set in determination. He pointed to her, then to the depths of the cave-like shelter formed by the rocks, his meaning clear. Hide. But Ingrid shook her head. I will not cower while you face them alone. We escape together or not at all. A fleeting smile touched his lips. Pride mingled with exasperation at her stubbornness. Then his expression sobered as he reached a decision. He took her hand, leading her deeper into the forest at a renewed pace, no longer following a direct path but weaving a complex route designed to confuse their pursuers. The sound of pursuit grew closer, voices calling to one another through the trees, the snap of branches underfoot. Einar suddenly pulled Ingrid down into a shallow gully where a fallen tree created a natural hiding place. They pressed themselves against the damp earth, scarcely daring to breathe as the hunting party passed within yards of their position. They could not have gone far, a gruff voice declared. The woman is soft, unused to the forest. She will slow them. Prince Bjorn wants them alive, another reminded. Remember his orders. The thrall, perhaps, a third voice countered. But would he truly mourn if an arrow found the traitor bride by accident? The voices faded as the searchers moved on, but the threat remained clear. They were being hunted like animals, and at least some of their pursuers had little interest in taking Ingrid alive. When it seemed safe, Einar motioned for them to continue, now heading toward the sound of rushing water in the distance. The forest grew denser, the terrain more difficult, but the roar of water grew louder with each careful step. They emerged at the edge of a ravine where a river churned 20 feet below, swollen with spring melt, its waters white with foam as they crashed against jagged rocks. On the far side, a sheer cliff face rose another 30 feet, offering no obvious path forward. Ingrid looked to Einar in confusion. There's no way across. He pointed upstream where the ravine narrowed slightly, suggesting a possible crossing point. But before they could move in that direction, a shout from behind confirmed their worst fears. They had been spotted. 2 of Bjorn's warriors burst from the tree line, weapons drawn. One knocked an arrow, taking aim at Einar's back. Without thinking, Ingrid shoved him aside, the arrow whistling past where he had stood a moment before. The second warrior charged forward, sword raised. Einar met the attack with nothing but a dagger he had concealed in his boot, parrying the first blow with desperate skill. The clash of metal on metal rang through the forest as they fought, Einar hampered by his injuries and inferior weapon, yet driven by a ferocity born of protecting what he loved. Ingrid scrambled for a weapon, finding only a heavy branch fallen from a lightning-struck tree. As the archer readied another shot, she swung with all her might, connecting with his arm and sending the arrow flying harmlessly into the canopy above. The moment of triumph was short-lived. More shouts echoed through the trees as the rest of the hunting party converged on their position. They were outnumbered, outarmed, with the raging river at their backs and no escape in sight. Einar dispatched his opponent with a desperate thrust, the dagger finding a gap in the warrior's leather armor. As the man fell, Einar grabbed Ingrid's hand, pulling her toward the narrowest point of the ravine. Their only hope lay in crossing before the remaining hunters closed in. But as they reached the edge, ready to attempt the treacherous leap across churning waters, a commanding voice froze them in place. Enough. Prince Bjorn stood at the forest's edge, bow drawn and aimed directly at Einar's heart. Behind him, 5 more warriors emerged from the trees, weapons at the ready. This pitiful chase ends now, Bjorn declared, his voice carrying easily over the river's roar. Surrender, and perhaps I'll grant you both quick deaths. Einar pushed Ingrid behind him, shielding her with his body as he faced the prince. His stance was defiant, even knowing the futility of resistance. She is mine by right, Bjorn continued, advancing slowly. By agreement between clans, by the laws of our people. No thrall can change that, no matter what foolish notions you've planted in her mind. To everyone's surprise, Bjorn suddenly lowered his bow. But I am not without mercy, he said, his tone shifting to one almost contemplative. I've watched you both these many months, seen the looks, the longing, the pathetic devotion. A cruel smile played across his lips. And I find I no longer want what does not want me in return. Ingrid stared in disbelief, waiting for the trap that surely lay beneath this unexpected turn. Bjorn's gaze fixed on her, cold and assessing. You have chosen him, with all the dishonor and hardship that entails. So be it. He gestured dismissively. Go, live your life with this mute slave. When the novelty fades and the reality of your choice settles in, remember that it was you who threw away everything for nothing. The prince turned his back on them, signaling his men to withdraw. Einar remained tensed, disbelieving, waiting for the attack that did not come. As the hunting party began to disappear back into the forest, Bjorn paused for one final pronouncement. Neither of you is welcome in these lands again, he called over his shoulder. Cross our borders, and my mercy ends. With that, he vanished into the shadows of the ancient trees, leaving them alone on the precipice between forest and void. The first breath of spring whispered through the northern hills, coaxing tender shoots of green from soil long frozen beneath winter's heavy hand. Snow retreated grudgingly up the mountainsides, revealing the awakening earth beneath, a promise of renewal that seemed impossible during the harshest months of exile. Upon a gentle slope overlooking a narrow fjord stood a small wooden cabin, its sturdy construction a testament to perseverance against the elements. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney, dancing with the morning breeze before dissolving into the vast Nordic sky. It was a modest dwelling, far from the grandeur of the chieftain's hall where Ingrid had spent her former life, yet there was something undeniably inviting about its weathered timbers and carefully thatched roof. Inside, warmth and the scent of fresh bread filled the single room. Ingrid stood at the rough-hewn table, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, fingers dusted with flour as she kneaded dough with practiced movements. Her golden hair, once elaborately braided and adorned with silver clips to denote her status, now hung in a simple plait down her back. Her clothes were plain, practical garments made from fabrics she had woven herself during the long winter evenings. Yet she wore them with the same grace she had once displayed in finery. As she worked, she hummed softly, an old melody her mother had taught her as a child, a song of sailors returning home across treacherous seas. The tune filled the small space with a gentle melancholy that belied the contentment evident in her movements. Behind her, the door opened to admit Einar, arms laden with freshly split firewood. He moved with the quiet efficiency that characterized all his actions, stacking the logs neatly beside the hearth before brushing wood chips from his tunic. Though still lean from their difficult winter, his frame had regained much of its former strength during their months in exile. The hard labor of building their shelter and hunting for their sustenance had restored the definition to his arms and shoulders, while proper rest had erased the haunted shadows from beneath his eyes. He paused to watch Ingrid, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth as she continued her song, unaware of his attention. Something about the domesticity of the moment seemed to touch him deeply. This woman who had abandoned privilege and security to share a life of hardship with him, finding joy in the simple act of making bread. Sensing his presence at last, Ingrid glanced over her shoulder, her song trailing off as their eyes met across the room. No words passed between them. None were needed. After nearly a year of learning to communicate without his voice, they had developed an understanding that transcended ordinary speech, a language of gestures and expressions that spoke volumes in silence. "The dough needs to rise," she said, covering the bowl with a clean cloth. "We'll have fresh bread with our evening meal." Einar nodded, crossing to the water bucket to wash the dirt from his hands. His movements were deliberate, economical, those of a man accustomed to making every action count. When he had dried his hands, he reached into a small pouch at his belt and withdrew something, keeping it concealed in his closed fist. Ingrid raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued by his secretive manner. "What have you there?" Instead of answering, even in his usual way, he simply extended his closed hand toward her, waiting. When she approached, he slowly opened his fingers to reveal his treasure. A simple cord of braided leather, from which hung the wooden talisman she had found washed up on the shore nearly a year ago. The once broken charm had been carefully mended, its two halves now joined by a delicate silver wire that caught the light filtering through the cabin's small windows. "Oh, Einar," she breathed, reaching out to touch the talisman with reverent fingers. "You've repaired it." He nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes as he lifted the necklace, silently asking permission to place it around her neck. Ingrid turned, lifting her braid out of the way as he fastened the simple adornment. The wooden charm settled against her collarbone, warm from being held in his hand. When she turned back to face him, Einar was watching her with an intensity that still, after all these months, made her heart quicken its pace. He touched the talisman where it rested against her skin, then placed his palm over his own heart, the gesture eloquent in its simplicity. Ingrid understood. The broken pieces joined together, stronger at their mending, like their lives, shattered and reformed into something new and precious. She reached up to touch his face, fingers tracing the line of his jaw with tender familiarity. He closed his eyes briefly at her touch, leaning slightly into her hand in a gesture that spoke of complete trust. When he opened his eyes again, they stood with foreheads touching, breathing the same air, existing in perfect stillness for a moment suspended out of time. No king's hall, no chieftain's wealth, no royal marriage could have given Ingrid what she found in that humble cabin with this silent man. The realization had come to her gradually over their months together, through the bitter cold of winter when they huddled for warmth beneath firs, through the hunger of early spring before hunting improved, through the backbreaking labor of creating a home from wilderness. What she had lost in comfort and status, she had gained tenfold in a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the promise of warming days ahead. Through the open door they could see the fjord below, ice breaking up along its shores, the water reflecting the blue of the clearing sky. In the distance, the snow-capped mountains still glowed golden in the afternoon light, a majestic backdrop to their simple lives. Einar moved away first, gesturing toward the unfinished tasks that still required attention before darkness fell. There was water to be fetched, traps to be checked, a small garden plot to be prepared for the seeds they had traded for at the distant settlement, where no one knew their names or their past. The practical concerns of survival that structured their days, yet never diminished the profound connection they shared. Ingrid nodded, understanding without words. As they worked side by side through the remainder of the day, Einar repairing fishing nets while Ingrid tended the fire and prepared their simple meal, a comfortable rhythm flowed between them, born of months adapting to each other's movements and needs. When twilight finally draped the hills in purple shadows, they sat together on the bench outside their door, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Ingrid leaned against Einar's shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around her waist, the night air cool against their faces. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly, breaking the peaceful silence. "All that we left behind?" Einar turned to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. He shook his head firmly, then pointed toward the humble cabin, the small plot of land they had claimed, the life they had built together from nothing. His hand returned to touch the mended talisman at her throat, his eyes never leaving hers as he conveyed without words that this life, this choice, this love, was worth any sacrifice. Ingrid smiled, understanding perfectly. "Nor do I," she whispered. "Not for a single moment." He drew her closer, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. In that simple gesture lay all the tenderness, all the devotion, all the silent promises that had carried them through their darkest hours. As darkness settled fully around them, Ingrid gazed up at the vast canopy of stars, feeling paradoxically both insignificant beneath their eternal light and immeasurably fortunate to be exactly where she was, with exactly whom she had chosen. "You never spoke a single word to me," she murmured, her voice soft in the gathering night. "Yet you taught me everything about what it means to truly love." Einar's arms tightened around her, his face turned toward the heavens where their ancestors watched from halls of light beyond the stars. No voice rose from his throat to answer her, no words disturbed the perfect stillness of the moment. Yet in the beating of his heart against hers, in the gentle strength of his embrace, in the unwavering devotion that had endured punishment, separation, and exile, in all these things, he spoke volumes. As the moon rose over the fjord, casting silver light across the dark waters, they remained together on the threshold of their hard-won home. two souls who had defied the rigid structures of their world to forge a different path. The price had been high: family, clan, security, status, yet neither looked back with regret. What they had found in each other transcended the boundaries of class and circumstance, proving that true connection needed neither titles nor even words to flourish. The melting snow continued its journey down the mountainside, feeding streams that would eventually reach the sea. Spring advanced steadily across the land, bringing renewal to soil long dormant under winter's grip. And in a small cabin on a northern hillside, two people who had risked everything for love embraced the future they had chosen, simpler than the one prescribed by birth and tradition, yet infinitely richer in the ways that truly mattered. Sometimes, true strength isn't found in power or status, but in the courage to choose your own path, even when the world stands against you. Ingrid and Einar's journey reminds us that love, in its purest form, doesn't require words, only actions, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion. In a world that valued rank and title above all else, they dared to believe that what existed between them was worth more than all the riches of a chieftain's hall. What would you risk for a love that defies all expectations? Would you, like Ingrid, abandon the security of privilege for a life of uncertainty with the one who truly sees you? Or would the fear of losing everything you've known keep you bound to the path others have chosen for you? Sometimes the most difficult choices reveal our truest selves, and the greatest treasures often lie beyond the borders of what we thought possible. If this story touched your heart, remember that there are countless tales of courage and forbidden love waiting to be discovered. Follow our channel for more powerful stories that will move you to tears and make you question what truly matters in life. Like and share if you believe, as Ingrid and Einar did, that some connections are worth any sacrifice. Until our next journey together, remember, the most meaningful lives are not always the easiest, but the ones chosen with our whole hearts.